Alright, this is Block 3, Lecture 2, A Metaphor by Which to Understand the American Revolution. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're about an 8-year-old kid, and Mom is taking care of you, and Dad is taking care of you up to the time that you are, about 8 years old. And then one day, around the age of 8, Mom and Dad pretty much say to you, "You're on your own, kid. We're going to provide a roof over your head. We're going to provide, protection, like that. We'll provide you enough food and water to survive, but pretty much you're on your own, kid." And for the next 8 or 9 years, until the kid is, 16, 17 years old, that was the reality for that kid. And they have to, make sure they do school by themselves and do a little bit of grocery shopping and, make sure they have clothes. That if you made it those 8 years, by the time you were 16 or 17 years old, I think we can imagine what kind of kid you'd be. You'd be strong and self-reliant and independent, and you probably wouldn't need much in the way of parental authority. Well, that's kind of what happened with the colonies. That this British policy of salutary neglect, plus the fact that Britain was dealing with its own issues. It had a civil war in the 1600s, wars in Europe, just a general British cultural idea to kind of live and let live, that for a long time the colonies kind of developed on their own, and they developed their own legislatures and their own economies, and yes, they were integrated with the British, but thousands upon thousands of colonists had absolutely no contact at all with the British authorities, the British economy, the British government. That you're dealing with a large nation, stretching from all up and down the East Coast, from Maine to Georgia, that's pretty self-reliant by 1763. Millions of people are living there, a few million people, 2.5 million people are living there. It has these varied different economies. There's, manufacturing in the north and a lot of commerce, and there's a lot of agriculture and successful farms and westward movement, and they all have militias. You're dealing with like a self-reliant, self-sustaining nation, really, that just happens to be 13 colonies strung out along the Atlantic seaboard, technically owing allegiance to the British king. And now, I want you to imagine back to that kid. You're that kid, and all of a sudden, at the age of 16, Mom and Dad walk back into the house and say, "Okay, here are the rules. You have to do this, you have to do that, you can't do this, you can't do that." And why are those the rules? Well, they're the rules because we said so. I think we can imagine that if you had been left alone for 8 or 9 years, you would chafe at being all of a sudden put underneath this type of much more active authority. And that's, I think, what happened between the British and the Americans. Now, let's look at this from either point of view. That from the British point of view, they're the parent, and the colonies have to listen to them because I said so. How many times have your parents used that line on you? "Well, you have to do this because I said so." Technically, you're right. Guess what? You do have to do it because they said so. Your parents are under no legal obligation to give you a reason why you need to eat your broccoli. You can't go out with your friends, and you can't, have 27 people in your basement partying on Friday night. That they don't have to give you a reason. They are under no legal obligation to give you a reason. And the American point of view with this whole thing is, where the heck were you for the last 10 years? Where the heck were you, Britain, for the last 100 years? We kind of developed without you, thank you very much, and we certainly don't need you now. So if you look at all of the acts and events and laws and reactions between the British and the Americans during this period of time, if you look at it through that prism of Britain has a legal right to do what it's doing, and America says, we're kind of beyond this at this point. If you look at it through that prism of, a kid who grew up on his own and then had parents come in and lay down the law, I think all of the things that happened here will make sense in context. Because what you're going to start to have in the uprun to the American Revolution is simply the British and the Americans, both technically Englishmen, both technically under the sovereignty of George III in Parliament, just completely not speaking, even though they were both speaking English, completely not speaking the same language and not seeing the same things. That an event would happen, and the Americans would look at it one way, and the British would look at it the same event completely differently. And when you start to get that because of all these misunderstandings and misinterpretation of what other people are and what other people are thinking, you have a recipe for violence. We're going to see that lack. We're going to see the fact that two different people can look at one event completely in opposite ways as a forerunner to violence, not only in this case, but before the Civil War also.